And here I'm starting with just roasting a few potatoes in a skillet with some olive oil. And you want to cut the potato fairly thin, nice and crispy. This is going to bake later on the dough. I would use a russet potato that is fairly starchy. So that was one large russet potato. And then in the olive oil, I'm going to put some onions. And I like to use a red onion for this. You cut up some onion, and then in they go into that same skillet that the potatoes were in. So you want 2 onions for this because these onions are going to cook down as they are in the pan, and then we're going to add some sugar and some vinegar to those later on. And here are pumpkin seeds that I toasted in the oven. All I did was put them on a piece of parchment paper. And you can find pumpkin seeds in your grocery store, you can get them in a gourmet food store, but make sure you're getting unhulled pumpkin seeds. You don't want to do this with hulled pumpkin seeds because then you're going to have the hulls sticking to the seed. So we toasted them, and now they're nice and crispy. And all I'm going to do is let those cool down in a bowl. So set those aside. Go over and check your onions and make sure that they're cooking down. Give them a little stir, and if need be, give them a little bit of olive oil. And I like to cook with extra virgin olive oil. I've been telling you about this now ever since we've been in the kitchen together. And we're going to make a dough that starts with the water that you saved from cooking potatoes, from boiling potatoes, because it's very starchy, and yeast just loves to feed on the sugar in starch. So in a bowl, I have proofed 1 package of yeast, dry yeast, in about a ½ cup of that potato water. You want to make sure that water is about 110 degrees, and to check it, use an instant read thermometer. Here is the rest of the water. So we want 1½ cups of water, the potato water, with the tablespoon of yeast. Then we let that proof. Now my onions are starting to get soft, and I want to add a little bit of vinegar to this. This is just good red wine vinegar, and I want that to evaporate. So I'm going to continue cooking the onions until all of that liquid is absorbed, and then I'm going to add a little bit of sugar to it. So on a board, if you're doing this in the old Fontana method, on a clean board, you want to heap some flour. And for this, we're using an all-purpose unbleached flour that has a protein content of about 12 to 13%, because you need to have good gluten development. So you cannot do this with cake flour. And I always use a little extra flour when I'm doing a fontana just to help me keep all of the liquid where it should be. You may not need all this flour, and if I don't use it all, what I can do is take it after I have formed the dough and put the rest of the flour through a sieve and get all of the little nubs of dough out, and then I can use that flour again. And now with that, we want a little bit of salt. Salt gives color to dough and also gives taste, and it controls the rise of the dough. And then this is something that's nifty that you can find in your grocery store. This is wheat gluten. And wheat gluten also helps dough development. So I'm going to put some of that in. And now all we have to do is mix that up again and make our hole. And you want to make a wall that's going to hold the liquid. And the first time you do this, I know exactly where all of this is going to go. Right on your shoes, because I have done it myself. It just takes a little bit of practice. So here is my liquid, the potato water. Get it right in the center. And I like to add a little bit of olive oil with this as well. So I have about a teaspoon of olive oil, so that's going to go in. Start mixing the liquid into the center. Mix the liquid very, very carefully, only from the inside wall of the dough. Because if you start from the outside wall, you're going to break it. It's not a terribly bad thing if that happens, because you can always patch. So as you continue doing this, the mixture in the center is going to get thick. And pretty soon you'll be able to put both your hands in that and start kneading this. So now I can bring in more flour to the center. And if your hands get really sticky, just add a little bit of flour to them. And that will help you move the dough around on the board. Now this is a dough scraper, and this helps you lift and turn the dough as you make it. You only want to put in as much flour as you absolutely need. And when I know that I have enough flour, I'm going to push the excess away. If you add too much flour, your dough is going to be hard to move, and it's not going to have the right texture. So this is all very, very important. Here we have 4 tablespoons of sugar, and that's really going to bring out the sweetness in the onions. I'm going to keep cooking this now until it's really, really soft. Okay, now the kneading begins. So once you have a shaggy mass, push everything else out of the way. And that's what this is good for, to get all those little bits up off the board. Then just take a little flour, sprinkle it on your surface, and start working the dough. And you'll know when this is exactly right, when it doesn't stick any longer to your hands. This is going to take you, about 5 minutes to do. And as you do it, it's going to be easier and easier to manage the dough. And as I knead this, I know I may be going a little too fast for you. I'm bringing the dough up on itself, turning it, and then kneading, pushing with my hand again. And that's the action. So it still needs a little bit of flour. All right, so now we need about 5 more minutes to make that really smooth. After that, get out a bowl and give it a little olive oil. And that's going to help keep the dough fairly moist. You don't want a crust on it. So I wipe the dough in the bowl, turn it over, and then get out a piece of plastic wrap and put it over the bowl tightly. This is going to help keep the heat in and help this dough rise. Now ideally, you want to put this somewhere where it's around 75 degrees. Do not heat the oven and then put this in. The dough will rise too rapidly and you will not have the texture or tang that you're looking for. These are going to go on our pizza, but we don't want to put them on while they're hot, so we want those to cool down some. And here is a risen dough with a Mount Vesuvius to boot. So you know that this is going to be a pretty good dough. So you want to punch this down. This helps to spread that gluten around, takes the air out of it, and I think you can see how nice and light that dough is. We're going to make a focaccia. Now you can make 2 focacce, or you could make a focaccia and a small loaf of bread, or you could make a deep dish pizza. The dough is very utilitarian. So let's start out by making the focaccia for you. And now this is where it becomes alla Mariana, because as I was telling you, focaccia is at the whim of the cook, whatever happens to be handy. And here are those pumpkin seeds that we toasted earlier. And I'm only going to use half of them because I'll use them for the other half of dough later on. And what I do is press them. You see how they just crackle because they're so nice and toasted. I just put a pile right on top of the dough. And then just fold the dough over on itself and start kneading again. You want those pumpkin seeds to come right through the dough. This gives a really nice crunch to this dough. It's a little bit different. And who says you can't be creative in the kitchen? Then, after these seeds are pretty much dispersed in the dough, then you want to roll it out. Now let that rest just for a few minutes, and let me talk to you about the pan we're going to put that on. Normally I would do this form it on a peel and then put it on a hot baking stone in the oven to cook. But I know that all of you don't have those, but this is something that you can find anywhere in a gourmet cook shop. And it's just a pizza pan that has a lot of perforated holes. And that's going to allow the dough to really cook nicely on the bottom as well as the top, because you want to make sure that you have a nice crusty crust. So we have the dough now, and we're ready to roll that out. So a little bit of flour. And this doesn't have to be anything fancy. Pizza is meant to be, and focaccia are meant to be, rustic foods. So if you've done the dough right, it should roll easily. Using your rolling pin, turn the dough every so often so you can get an even thickness all the way around. Okay, looks good, and I worked up a sweat. Now it goes on the pan. So you lift the dough up off the board, put it right on the pan, and then just form it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, those cooled potatoes, here they are. I cut them very thinly. You can either use something called a mandolin, you've seen me use that before, or you can just hand cut them very, very thin. And now we want those onions. And they have cooled down. Beautiful. And I just take a fork and spread them over the top. And then the last thing I'm going to add to this is some black pepper and some thyme. Does that look beautiful? And when I use herbs, I use them fresh. Here's fresh thyme. You can find that anywhere. In your grocery store, you could grow it in your backyard. You just take it off the stem, and it imparts a really nice flavor with this. So here is some timo, or thyme, as they say in Italian. Goes over the top. Looks almost like Christmas, doesn't it? And then a little bit of black pepper. Now we're going to cover this and let this rise for about 20 minutes before we put it in the oven. I have one risen focaccia here for you to look at. Look how beautiful that is. And that's ready to go in to the top oven, 400 degrees, for about 20 or 25 minutes, or until that bottom crust is nicely browned.